David Curry cursed again and looked around. How could he, a man who had crossed the age of 40, intelligent and successful, make such a foolish mistake? He didn't understand himself, let alone anyone from his inner circle. Lucy caught him and they had a bad conversation. It wasn't even a conversation, it was her confession. He listened silently because he knew that if he tried to say something, she would disconnect immediately. He listened, clenching his fists helplessly, and he knew that she was right about everything. But he didn't want to admit it, didn't want to let go of the pain that had been living inside him for years. He and Lucy had been together for 15 years. He thanked God every day for meeting her once, and knew for sure that Lucy would never stop loving him or betray him. But the understanding of their integrity did not come immediately. At first he worked so hard that he only appeared at home to change clothes. Lucy sighed and used to say to him, "David, we are not 20 anymore. Don't you think it's time to think about having a child?" He usually smiled, kissed her fingers in response, and said, "Lucy, why are you saying such strange things? We just need to wait a little longer, a little bit. Honestly, a few more deals and we can take a break. Then we'll think about the baby." He kept his word. 5 years ago, they were able to go on a vacation together for the first time in their married life. And when they returned, David slowed down a bit in his work. The bank worked like clockwork. The management was quite satisfied with his work. The profit was gradually growing. And now David could spend a few hours on business and all the rest of the time with his wife. But Lucy did not become happier for this, but rather the opposite. David was really hurt when sometimes she didn't want to go for a walk with him or go to a restaurant, and said she didn't need anything if he invited his wife to the mall to buy her a gift. He understood that something was happening, but was sure that she could not stop loving him. Then one fine day, when all of this had become too much for David, he sat his wife down in front of him and said, "Lucy, I can't take it anymore. I'm ready to put the whole world at your feet, and you keep turning away from me. Can you explain to me? I can buy everything you want, but you don't want anything." Lucy looked up at him. "So you can buy everything? Then buy us happiness." Only now did David finally understand the reason. "But Lucy, we still have time. It's just not working out right now. But I'm certain that we'll definitely have a baby." Lucy quietly cried. "It is too late for us. You see, I'm already 37. The doctor said there's a chance, but it's small." "But there is a chance," David tried to reassure his wife. "David, you are making fun of me. Don't you understand anything?" David jumped up. "Lucy, I also really want children. I'm very sorry that we postponed it for so long, and I don't absolve myself of guilt, but all we can do now is wait." Lucy also stood up. David, listen to me. While we wait, whether a miracle happens or not, we'll be over 40, and if it doesn't happen, let's take a child from an orphanage." David was shocked. "Lucy, are you crazy? You know very well what kind of people abandon children. Anything can grow out of such a child. No, I'm not ready for that." He saw how painful it was for his wife to listen to him, but he decided that he needed to clarify everything right away. Lucy distanced herself even more. David also suffered, but he couldn't help it. Probably he isn't a very good person. He often helped the local orphanage, but only financially. He couldn't imagine himself hugging and loving a child whose parents were alcoholics or worse. Several months had passed since their conversation, and today Lucy decided to end their relationship. She called David when he was already on his way home. "Lucy, I'm on my way home. I'll be home soon." "You don't have to hurry. I'm calling to say that I'm not at home." "When will you be back?" "I've missed you and I don't want to have dinner without you." "I'll never be back, David. I took something from my things. I'll come back for the rest later. And I'll file for divorce myself. Please forgive me and understand I don't want to and can't live like this." "Lucy, why are you saying such things? It's ridiculous. Thousands of people live without children. Let's try IVF again." "No, 6 times are enough. Please, don't look for me. Don't try to convince me. Let's just break up and not stress each other out. I'm not coming back anyway. Forgive me." She hung up and David hit the brakes. He knew Lucy very well. Calling her again now was useless. He couldn't drive in this state. He needed to gather his thoughts. In front of him was an old park, and further, as far as he remembered, there were old houses that were preparing for demolition. Just what he needed, David thought. Something gloomy and scary. He wandered for a long time. There were indeed abandoned houses with gaping holes instead of windows. Soon David realized that he was hopelessly lost. He looked around and smiled. A real dead town, almost like my soul. The next second, David realized that it could be even worse. A pack of homeless dogs was running towards him, apparently abandoned by their owners here. Since childhood, David had been terribly afraid of dogs. He never told anyone about it, but he knew that dogs always sense fear. Looking around, he realized he probably wouldn't make it to the nearest house in time. Even if he did, who's to say the dogs wouldn't follow him through a window? Panic spread through his body. The dogs were only about 5 meters away from him when someone suddenly came out with such a scream that David's ears were blocked. It was a boy who apparently knew the dogs and the area very well. He was waving something rapidly, and after a couple of minutes the pack ran off. The dogs were already barking in the distance when David came to his senses. The boy, who was about 7 years old, looked at him with interest and asked, "What are you doing here?" "I'm lost," David replied. "Come on, I'll show you the way. It's not safe to wander around here," said the boy, leading the way. David walked alongside him and looked with interest at the thing with which the boy defeated the dogs. "What is that?" he asked. The boy looked at him in surprise. "Can't you see? It's my saber. My dad gave it to me a long time ago." The saber was old and rusty, but it really looked like a real one. "Yes, it's real. My dad found it when he was digging," the boy said. Apparently that explanation was enough in the boy's mind, and David didn't ask anything else, because he saw a park up ahead. "Well, you'll get there on your own," said the boy, looking at the man. It was only now that David noticed that the boy was dressed very poorly. He threw out a few bills from his wallet and said, "Here, take this as a thank you." The boy looked at the money, and David realized that he really wanted to take it. But the child only said, "Good deeds are not done for money," and just walked away. Once home, David went to the living room and sat on the couch. Nothing had changed. Everything was still clean, beautiful and cozy. And empty. The house that Lucy had so lovingly decorated now seemed unfriendly to him. "I have to go to sleep, otherwise I'll just go crazy." But he couldn't fall asleep right away. The boy was still in front of his eyes. Good deeds are not done for money. It's outstanding that such a young boy dressed so poorly had such dignity and honesty. I wonder what he was doing there among the abandoned houses, and how his parents could let him go there. Suddenly David had the thought that maybe the boy had been living there. He had heard that not all families were given housing yet, but he immediately dismissed the idea. It couldn't be. The night was restless. David was already up at 5 o'clock. Usually he came to work an hour after the bank opened, but today he arrived an hour earlier. The security guard almost fainted when he saw him. Nothing extraordinary happened. "Why are you here so early?" David smiled. "Don't worry, I have some papers to finish." David just sat in his chair and looked out the window. Of course he didn't have any unfinished papers. He just didn't want to be at home. The workday had already started at the bank. Grace, his secretary, had already made him coffee. David decided to go to the hall and see how things were going. He was walking down the hallway when he heard something happening in the hall. Almost immediately, he saw a boy waving a saber and shouting, "Please, give me the money! I need to buy medicine for my grandmother!" His voice was breaking, and it was clear that the young robber was crying. Everyone was looking at him in shock. Finally, the security guard got up and grabbed him, and then David saw the child's face. It was his savior from yesterday. "Wait, don't touch him!" The security guard dropped the boy in surprise, and he fell. David rushed to him, took him by the arm, stood him up, and led him after him. As he approached his office, he asked Grace to bring something to eat, and then shut the door behind him. "So, how should I understand this?" he asked, looking at the boy seriously. "I needed to buy medicine for my granny. She's sick, do you understand? And we have nowhere to borrow money from for another 4 days because we already owe everyone." "Do you know that robbing a bank will get you in trouble?" asked David. "I know, I don't care. The main thing is for my grandmother to get better." David shook his head. "What do your parents think about this?" "I don't know, they're dead," the boy replied. David was taken aback by what he heard, but at that moment Grace came into the office. "Mr. Curry, here are the sandwiches and tea. All the cafes are still closed, so I can't offer anything else." Grace left the office, and David said to the boy, "Eat and give me your name. What's happened to your grandmother, and where do you live?" "My name's Michael. We live where the dogs attacked you. Everyone has already moved away and forgotten about us. Grandma is very sick, but she doesn't tell anyone, so they won't take me to an orphanage. And yesterday she got even sicker. We don't have money for medicine, and there's some problem with the documents, so Grandma doesn't get any allowance for me. And we bought firewood, otherwise we'll freeze in the winter, so we have almost no money left." Michael spoke and quickly finished his plate, while David was shocked by what the boy had to endure. "Well, finished eating? Let's go to your grandma now," David said. Michael was a little surprised by this statement and then smiled. Once at Michael's home, David realized that everything was even worse than he had imagined. The boy's grandmother was coughing heavily and almost unconscious. David called an ambulance. The arriving paramedics put the elderly woman in the ambulance to deliver her to the hospital. The boy looked at David. "What am I supposed to do now? Go to the orphanage?" "Well, you can live with me for a while," David said, and was surprised with himself. As soon as he opened the door, David realized Lucy was home. Something delicious smelled from the kitchen, and soft music played. Michael, seeing the magnificence of the house, became shy. Lucy came out into the hallway. "Hello, David. No matter how hard I tried, I can't live without you," Lucy said, and smiled sadly. David smiled. "Hello, my darling. I'm happy that you realized that. By the way, I'm not alone. Lucy, meet Michael." A year passed. Lucy and David sat in the car waiting for Michael to come out of school. They were both very proud of their adopted son. Lucy and Michael's grandmother could talk for hours about his successes, of which there were indeed many, and David himself felt proud when Michael brought home another thank you note or certificate. "David, I have to tell you something. I'm pregnant. And I'm scared now," Lucy said. This was great news, but David carefully asked, "I don't understand. Is there something else? Aren't you happy?" "I'm ecstatic, but what about Michael? We won't give him up, will we?" David breathed a sigh of relief and hugged his wife. "Oh my God, I can't believe it. Of course we won't. Don't worry about Michael. He's a good guy, and he will be a wonderful big brother." If you liked the story, please support me with the thumbs up button. It's just one click for you, but it means a lot to me. Thank you.